Good day, everybody, and welcome to another edition of the Military and Foreign Affairs Network. I am your host, the voice of reason. Today, we are continuing our ongoing coverage of the Russian-Ukrainian war. And I think some of you may have already heard that the Russians are claiming that they have taken control of the town of Soledar. The town of Soledar is just to the north of Bakhmut. Obviously, the Russians have also been pressing their operations towards Bakhmut as well. But it seems that the Russians have achieved some sort of breakthrough near Soledar. And there's reports that the Russians specifically want control of the city for the valuable salt mines, the ability to move possibly weapons and equipment into these salt mines and prevent Ukrainian HIMARS attacks from hitting its forces, the Russian forces, by using these vast salt mining tunnels. Now, is that actually what they're doing? Difficult to say. That's just one theory on why Soledar is so important. But there appears to be still fighting going on in Soledar. It appears that the Russians have made it into the center of the town with about a battalion-sized element of the Ukrainian military still operating both inside and on the outskirts of Soledar. We also know that the Ukrainians have positioned at least two tank brigades outside of Soledar, and a Ukrainian air mobile brigade, along with territorial defense brigades as well. So it's possible we could see a very quick Ukrainian counterattack towards Soledar. They've done that in the past, and is it possible that the Ukrainians will do that near Soledar or in Soledar? Difficult to say at this point. Another interesting tidbit of information. It seems that the Russians have shaken up the command staff again of who's in charge of this war. So over the last 3 months, it was General Surovikin, General aka Armageddon, and now it appears that Gerasimov is now in control of the Ukrainian operation, which is odd because that would essentially, if you were to look at it from the United States point of view, that would be like the commander of the Joint Chiefs of Staff taking over a military operation. It would be like the head of the Joint Chiefs of Staff taking over the military operation in Iraq. So if that's indeed what has happened, that's strange, and it's odd, and but again, we don't know if that is exactly what has happened. It's possible, and maybe there's reasons for this Russian move, if in fact it is true. But we also know, going back to the fighting near Soledar, that the fighting is just incredibly bloody. Some are comparing to the fighting in and around Soledar to Stalingrad. Just the level of intensity, the level of in some cases, very, very close quarters combat that is taking place, quite literally with Russian and Ukrainian forces fighting house-to-house battles, pitched battles, massive battles, with quite possibly thousands of casualties on both sides. And obviously it was very important for the Ukrainians to maintain control of Soledar. It's important for the Ukrainians to maintain control of Bakhmut to the south as well, this area here. So now the question is how will the Russians be able to exploit the seizure of Soledar? If we look at the way the war is being fought, again, we're not seeing a war of maneuver. So the concept that we'll see this rapid Russian breakthrough near Soledar and the Russians threaten Kramatorsk, I think is highly unlikely. Highly unlikely. We're going to have to see the Russians open up another front, someplace completely different than Soledar, Bakhmut, probably more towards Kharkov, or up north again, as I've talked about this before, near Sumy, or even further to the west near Chernihiv. But more importantly, we're just not seeing the type of maneuver operations, especially with the forces that are deployed near Soledar. Again, these are not large tank formations. These are fighters of the Wagner organization. These are Spetsnaz forces. These are forces of the Russian VDV, airborne forces as well. These are a lot of very highly capable light infantry forces by the Russians that are being deployed in this urban slugfest here in Soledar. So now the question is do the Russians have elements of, say, the 1st Tank Army or other large armored formations that they're getting ready to utilize in this area of the conflict zone? Again, difficult to say at this point. The Ukrainians, at least certain parts of the Ukrainian command staff, believe that the Russians are getting ready to do something towards Kiev. Here at MFAN, we simply don't think that's going to happen at this point. We think it could happen, but in all probability it will happen at a much later date, towards late summer. And again, the idea that the Russians are going to launch an attack towards Kiev out of Belarus within the next 30 to 60 days, incredibly remote. Incredibly remote. But again, probably late summer, again, Sumy, north of Chernihiv, this area here. Possibly Kharkov. I know Kharkov has to be still in the back of a Kremlin leadership mindset. This has to be a primary target, given its proximity to the Russian border, the size of the city. I believe the Russians going into this war honestly felt that seizing control of Kharkov was a no-brainer. But for the Russians, that hasn't happened. And again, Kharkov, very large city, 2nd largest city in all of Ukraine, a vast underground network of metro tunnels that can facilitate the movement of troops around the city. This is going to be a difficult nut to crack if Russian forces decide to attack it or to envelop it. If you guys remember my very early videos talking about this war, I had anticipated that if the Russians were going to for Kharkov, they would indeed encircle it, cut it off, and basically lay siege to it. The idea that they would be able to move into Kharkov and seize control of it was going to be something probably that was outside of current Russian capability, unless there was this full-scale mobilization in which the Russians could deploy vast amounts of infantry formations into Kharkov. But we haven't seen that yet. Now, maybe if we see a second round of mobilization, January, February, it hasn't started yet. But if it does, probably July, August at best is when these forces will be trained up and be able to be deployed against the Ukrainians. But again, right now, the Russians looks like they've taken control of Soledar, and it looks like they're rolling things up in Soledar. This is going to be a tough defeat for the Ukrainians. But again, it would not surprise me if we see some sort of a counterattack by the Ukrainians. Just wouldn't. In other news, we're now hearing that Ukrainian forces will be heading to the United States, and they will be trained at Fort Sill, Oklahoma. And let me pull up Fort Sill here where everybody can see Fort Sill, and have a look at the base. And just let me transfer over from the deep state map to Google Earth. This is a little bit of process with OBS. Almost there. All right, we should have the Google Earth map set up. All right, so here we are. We're just north of the Texas border. We're near the town of Fort Sill, Oklahoma, and we'll zoom in and let you see the military base where the Ukrainians are heading. Now, this base serves as training areas for elements of U.S. Air Defense Forces, Patriot batteries, and also field artillery as well. Fort Sill also serves as one of the 4 primary training areas for Army basic training. And this is it. And you can zoom in. You can see the motor pools. You can see the air defense units. You can see heavy artillery units. M109, Paladins. There's your heavy artillery, self-propelled, towed artillery. Ukrainians are using these now too. Not the, well, yeah, they're using both of these systems. So in all probability, the Ukrainians that are going to be sent to this base are going to be training on the Patriot, and they'll probably be training as well on the field artillery aspect as well. And then to the west of the motor pools, you can see the ammo bunkers, and then you can see the actual training areas. If you zoom in here, you can see just this landscape is really taking a beating from all the artillery that's been used over the decades. You can see destroyed structures and vehicles. I think as you get closer here, you can see actual destroyed vehicles and such. There they are. But yeah, this is where they send rounds downrange, I assume. I've never been to Fort Sill, so I could be wrong. Looks like some troops in the field here training. They look like Bradleys. And then some Oshkosh vehicles. But yeah, this is where the Ukrainians will be heading in training, up to 200 at Fort Sill, Oklahoma, United States. But that's what we have for today. We'll have more very, very soon. Just on a side note, been very, very busy at my ultimately real job. So I apologize for producing content on a not so as frequent of a basis, but hopefully we'll start to produce more as it gets a little less busy for me. I appreciate everyone joining us for today. We'll have more very, very soon. Have a good day.